Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping into the absolutely wild story of how one man dragged Rome kicking and screaming from a collapsing republic into a world-spanning empire.
So here's the big question. How on earth does a teenager, an 18-year-old, end up as the most powerful person on the planet? Well, it doesn't start with some brilliant long-term plan. It starts with an assassination, a total shock to the system that creates this massive power vacuum, just waiting for someone ambitious enough to fill it. Right, so let's set the scene. It's the Ides of March, 44 BC, and Julius Caesar has just been stabbed to death right on the floor of the Senate. The assassins thought they were saving the Republic, but they didn't. All they did was plunge Rome into total and utter chaos. And what happens next is just mind-bogglingly fast. Think about it. Within weeks, not months, weeks of Caesar's murder, his teenage grand-nephew, a young man named Gaius Octavius, makes this incredibly gutsy call to accept his great-uncle's will. He's claiming everything. Now, this inheritance, it wasn't just about the money, though yeah, the wealth was staggering. No, the real prize was inheriting the most powerful brand in Rome, the name Caesar. That name meant everything. It commanded the loyalty of entire legions and the love of the Roman people. It was pure political gold. So, armed with a legendary name and a mountain of cash, this young man, who now calls himself Octavian, starts to play the game. And let me tell you, he plays a masterful and completely ruthless game of political chess. His first move is just brilliant. He plays both sides against each other. On one hand, he uses Caesar's money to raise his own private army, pulling in all of Caesar's loyal veterans. But at the same time, he goes to the Senate, the very people who hated Caesar, and gets their political backing. They saw him as, a useful kid they could control to take down the bigger threat, Mark Antony. They had no idea who they were dealing with. But the moment Octavian's army gets a victory, he drops the act. He marches on Rome itself and shows his true colors. He cuts a deal with his old rival, Mark Antony, and another general named Lepidus. And this was no secret backroom deal like the first triumvirate. Oh no. The second triumvirate was a legally recognized three-man dictatorship with absolute terrifying power over the state. And their first move? It was chilling. To fill their war chest and get rid of anyone who might oppose them, they brought back something called prescriptions. They literally just published death lists. Around 3,000 of Rome's wealthiest citizens were hunted down and killed, their property seized. In one fell swoop, the old Roman aristocracy was basically wiped out. So, after they hunt down and defeat Caesar's assassins, the triumvirate carves up the Roman world. But a three-way partnership like that is never going to last. Eventually, Lepidus is pushed aside, and only two giants are left standing, Octavian in the west and Mark Antony, shacked up with Cleopatra, in the east. And before a single sword is drawn, Octavian launches one of the most effective propaganda campaigns in history. He's a genius at this. He frames the whole upcoming conflict not as another messy Roman civil war, but as a righteous defense of Roman values against a corrupt, foreign, Eastern menace. And notice, he very cleverly attacks Cleopatra, not Antony. He paints her as the seductive foreign queen, a sorceress who has Antony completely wrapped around her finger. He spread rumors that they planned to move the capital of the empire to Alexandria. By making her the face of the enemy, he united all of Italy behind him. It was a masterstroke. All that propaganda, well, it leads to a real war, which all comes to a head at the massive naval battle of Actium. Octavian's top admiral, a man named Agrippa, just delivers a crushing defeat. Antony and Cleopatra's fleet is completely shattered. Antony and Cleopatra manage to escape, but they flee back to Egypt, where they both end up committing suicide. And just like that, it's over. The young man who started this whole journey with basically just a famous name and a ton of inherited cash is now, at just 33 years old, the absolute and undisputed master of the entire Roman world. Okay, so you've won. You have all the power. But here's the billion-dollar question. How do you keep it? Especially when your great-uncle was literally stabbed to death for wanting that same power. This, right here, is where we see Octavian's real genius shine. So in 27 BC, in what has to be one of the greatest bits of political theater ever, He walks into the Senate and makes this unbelievable announcement. He says he's giving all his emergency powers back to the Senate and the people of Rome. He declares, "The Republic is restored."
But of course, this was all a brilliant illusion. The Senate was terrified of going back to civil war, so they begged him to keep his powers. He kept all the old Republican offices in place. You still had consuls, you still had a Senate, but he just had them grant him all their most important powers. He controlled the armies, he had veto power over any law. He didn't tear down the Republic, he just hollowed it out and put himself in charge of everything.
And this new system he created, we call it the Principate. He called himself the Princeps, or first citizen. But make no mistake, it was a monarchy in everything but name. And this political workaround he invented would define the Roman Empire for the next 300 years.
So why are we talking about this? Why does this 2,000-year-old story of backstabbing and politics still matter one bit today? Well, because the man now known as Augustus left behind a legacy that, frankly, continues to shape the world you and I live in.
His first, and maybe his greatest, gift to the Roman people was peace. After 100 years of constant, brutal civil war, he kicked off an era of stability we call the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. For 2 centuries, the Mediterranean world was largely at peace, allowing culture, the economy, and new ideas to absolutely flourish.
And the long-term impact of that, it's huge. That long period of peace is what allowed Greco-Roman culture, ideas, and law to spread and take root everywhere. It literally became the foundation for what we think of as Western civilization. We are still living in the world that peace created.
But he did more than just bring peace. He built the actual machinery of a modern government to keep it. He created a professional civil service. People paid a salary to run the state. He built a permanent professional army that was loyal to the emperor, not to some rogue general. And he created an organized tax system.
Does any of that sound familiar? It should. A civil service, a national army, an organized tax system. These are the absolute cornerstones of almost every modern country on the planet today. His final, and maybe most enduring, legacy was in the world of law.
That long piece of his reign gave Roman law the time it needed to be organized and spread. And this logical, codified legal system is so incredibly influential that it is the direct ancestor of the civil law systems used today in most of Europe, all over Latin America, and in many other parts of the world. So in the end, who was he? He stopped a century of bloodshed, he brought peace and prosperity, and he created the blueprint for an empire that would shape human history. But he did it all by systematically killing a 500-year-old republic. Was he the savior of Rome, or the man who destroyed its freedom? That's the fascinating question he leaves us with.